This day in sports history. It's February 28th, and here on the cusp of March Madness, when a lot of us will be planted in front of a television watching college basketball, let's go back to 1940, when it was the first ever televised college basketball game. This was a college doubleheader played that day in New York's Madison Square Garden. Game 1 featured the Pitt Panthers and the Fordham Rams. Television was in its early days. While the first actual broadcast had been back in 1928, there were still not many television stations popping up just yet. W2XBS was an experimental New York station, and this was not its first live sports broadcast either. In fact, just 3 days earlier, the station had broadcast the first televised National Hockey League game between New York and Montreal at MSG. W2XBS had also broadcast the first Major League Baseball game the year before. Well, on this day, their cameras televised the Pitt-Fordham basketball game, and while it may seem like this would have been a really big deal, it barely registered a blip at the time. First, there were not a whole lot of television sets in people's homes to actually be able to watch it. Estimates vary from about 400 to maybe 1,000 people who actually had the ability to watch the game that day in and around New York City. It would not really be for another decade for TV sets to really start showing up in people's living rooms. But live broadcasts like this first one were important to showcase what this brand new technology could bring. The game itself was close for the first half, with Pitt up 5 at the break, but the Panthers used a 14-2 run in the second half to take control and win 57-37. None of the game stories that followed ever mentioned that this game was actually on television. Hey, real quick, you've heard me talk a lot about the Sterling Soap Company over the past few months, and if you haven't tried out their soaps, I get it. It's not easy changing up your routine. But let me just say, if you give them a try, I'm nearly 100% certain you will have zero regrets. They carry not only bar soap, but shave soap, liquid body soap, body lotions, beard balm, lip balm, and a lot more. Plus, there are myriad scents to choose from. Their products are made with natural ingredients and scented oils, and they are committed to being environmentally conscious. And I always get a handwritten note on my packing slip, so I know it's been checked before shipping, and it's a nice little human touch in a world that seems to be going away from that. Give Sterling Soap a try today at sterlingsoap.com. We're more than a week removed from the Four Nations Cup and Canada's 3-2 OT win over the U.S., and yet folks are still talking about how exciting that game was and how it was a huge win for hockey in contrast to the pathetic NBA All-Star weekend. Well, that Canadian win over the U.S. was a bit reminiscent of what happened on this day back in 2010 when the U.S. and Canada played in the gold medal game of the Vancouver Olympics. Similar to the Four Nations Cup, the U.S. had beaten Canada earlier in these games back in pool play. The U.S. advanced out of Pool A with 3 wins and advanced to the quarterfinals of the tournament, while Canada had 1 win, 1 overtime win, and a loss, and had to play an extra game in the tournament. The Canadians skated to easy wins over Germany and Russia, and then beat Slovakia 3-2 to advance to the gold medal game. The U.S. looked unbeatable with a 2-0 win over Switzerland, and then after scoring 6 goals in the first period against Finland, eased into the championship game. But here in the gold medal game, it was Team Canada that grabbed the momentum, scoring goal number 1 in the first period with a Jonathan Toews shot, and added to it in the second when Corey Perry scored. The U.S. got one back 5 minutes later when Ryan Kessler found the back of the net, but things looked grim as time wound down in the third. The U.S. had pulled goalie Ryan Miller for the extra skater, and that paid a big dividend.
Over to the side, all the way around. Here's Pavelski again, right in front. Turnaround, off the skate. U.S. has tied it! Zach Parise, right in front.
Parise's goal came with 24 ticks on the clock, and the game went to overtime. In between the end of regulation and overtime, the Canadians had to regroup. They'd just given up a relatively soft goal, and Big Mo had definitely swung to the Americans. Sidney Crosby said years after that Mike Babcock looked around the room and said simply, "You guys have an opportunity of a lifetime. Go take it." Crosby took that to heart, and it was as if all the stars aligned for Sid the Kid to be the hero.
It would be almost a fairy tale if someone, say like Sidney Crosby, would find a way to light the lamp. Here comes Crosby all the way in. What can he do? Can't split the two defensemen. Poked around. Crosby. It's over! Just like that!
It was a fairy tale moment for Crosby, and he reflected on what that moment meant.
That's a moment you dream of as a kid growing up, playing for Team Canada, scoring a big goal like that. It could have been anyone, and I was fortunate enough to put that in.
Of course, lots of parallels drawn between Crosby's goal back in 2010 and Connor McDavid's game winner in OT in the Four Nations Cup a few weeks back. It was just one more great moment in this U.S.-Canadian hockey rivalry. On this day in 1990, the Edmonton Oilers and Los Angeles Kings combined for the most penalties in an NHL game.
And behind the play, we've got another fight breaking out, and the goaltender Ranford is in this one. Now everybody on the ice piling back into the Oilers' zone. So I guess this is somewhat of a fitting climax to this game. It's been this way all night long.
The Oilers chalked up 26 minors at 2 minutes apiece, 7 majors at 5 minutes apiece, 6 10-minute misconducts, 4 game misconducts, and a match penalty. The Kings also received 26 minors, 9 majors, 3 10-minute misconducts, and 3 game misconducts, for a combined total of 85 penalties. There were a lot of fights in this one. Marty McSorley was involved in 3 of them. He was later one of the players booted from the game along with Steve Smith and Jeff Bukaboom. Despite the number of penalties, the game only had 356 penalty minutes. Now, I say only because at the time, it fell short of the NHL record for penalty minutes of 380 set back in 1979, and it is only 5th on that list now, with the current record of 419 set back in 2004. Hey, I needed to call a quick timeout to let you know that we're giving away a $50 gift card to Homefield Apparel. Have a favorite college sports team? Of course you do. You're listening to a sports podcast. Well, Homefield Apparel has all the great gear so you can support your team in style. Jerseys, hoodies, hats, and a whole lot more are available in your team's colors and insignias. So go to sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways for your chance at a $50 gift card to Homefield Apparel. I've also put a link in the show notes. Now, let's get back out there. We've got more of this episode to do. On this day in 1971, Jack Nicklaus won his second PGA Championship to secure his second career Grand Slam. Now, if you're thinking February is a little early in the year for a golf major, isn't it? Well, you'd be right. This is the only time that the PGA Championship was ever staged in February. With the tournament slated to be played in Palm Beach, Florida, PGA officials were a little worried about oppressive heat for the usual August calendar slot, and so they moved it to the wintertime. Nicklaus led wire to wire and had a large enough lead that he could coast to the finish with a final round 73 to win by 2 shots over Billy Casper. This gave him his second Wanamaker trophy to go along with his 3 green jackets, 2 claret jugs, and 2 U.S. Open cups. Gene Sarazen had been the first to win all 4 of what we now consider to be the major tournaments of the Masters, U.S. Open, British Open, and PGA Championship. Ben Hogan equaled that feat in 1953. Gary Player and Tiger Woods are the only other ones to do it. Both Tiger and Jack have won the career Grand Slam 3 times. On this day in 1986, 11 Major League Baseball players were suspended for the season for their involvement with cocaine. It was the 80s, and both cocaine and baseball were king. Coke permeated society and made its way into baseball. This started in Pittsburgh, and the whole scandal would come to be known as the Pittsburgh drug trials. A few of the more well-known players suspended by Commissioner Peter Ueberroth were New York Mets first baseman Keith Hernandez, New York Yankee utility man Dale Barham, the son of Yogi, who had played with the Pirates in the 70s and the 80s, Cincinnati outfielder Dave Parker, who also played in Pittsburgh for a couple of years, Oakland pitcher Joaquin Andujar, and Kansas City outfielder Lonnie Smith. And there were others who received lesser sanctions. After the '86 season, Ueberroth made the bold statement that baseball was now drug-free. However, Lonnie Smith disputed that claim, saying he had not been drug tested one time after his reinstatement, and said that drugs, specifically cocaine, were still prevalent in the game in '87. What followed on the heels of the cocaine scandal, however, was the rise of steroids, which made its way into baseball clubhouses in the '90s and proliferated into the 2000s. It is more than interesting to wonder what would have happened if a more restrictive drug policy and mandatory drug testing had been implemented after what came out during the Pittsburgh drug trials. And on this day in 1999, Serena Williams won her first WTA singles title. She beat Amelie Mauresmo in a third-set tiebreak in the Open Gaz de France. Serena was an unseeded player coming into that tournament, and she would win her first major at the U.S. Open later that year. And time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports Fun Fact. John Lennon is credited with the now well-known medal symbol of the index and pinky fingers extended to simulate the devil horns. His cartoon character on the cover of the Yellow Submarine album is sporting the gesture several years in advance of Ronnie James Dio's or Gene Simmons' claims to being the creators of the gesture. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.